I don't think I'm going to read as much as I'm just going to talk about this book. I will share a little bit about where it came from and how it happened, and then I'll talk a little bit about putting it together. When I was 16 years old and living in Chamberlain, South Dakota, which is right on the river. Now, I know there's supposed to be a river somewhere here, but there is only one river, okay? And that's the Missouri River. And Chamberlain is just on the east side, but the land that we grew up on is on the west side, about 20 miles from the river. On May 1962 of my sophomore year, I was just finishing my sophomore year of high school, there was a murder on a quiet little neighborhood street in Chamberlain, a town of about 2,200 people. The murderer was a 24-year-old transgender man, was likely what she was, but in 1962 we didn't have that language, of course, right? I remember her being very boyish. I remember she wore cowboy boots and so forth, and her hair was cut very short. She had what we called a duck ass, you know, the James Dean. And she was 24. She was a laundry worker, an 8th grade dropout. She was having a relationship with a 19-year-old girl who was at the same time engaged to a 21-year-old native man. This was all pretty stunning when you're 16 years old in Chamberlain, South Dakota in 1962. But I never really thought beyond the craziness of it. I mean, I think I sort of saw the people as caricatures, just kind of goofy, weird people. How can this happen? And I had very little understanding of the story behind that murder. And then I was cleaning out my mother's house. She had moved into assisted living in Chamberlain. And I was cleaning out her house, and I was going through her sheet music, and I found this front page of the Mitchell Daily Republic. It's in August 1962, and it's Bev Waugh, the murderer, and her attorney on the opening day of the trial in Chamberlain, South Dakota. Why my mother kept it, why she kept that paper for all that length of time, I don't know. Why it was hidden in her sheet music, I suspect because she didn't want her children seeing it, but that's just a suspicion, because she was very uptight about things. So I was reading through it, and I don't want to open it up, it's so fragile I won't open it up anymore. I was reading through the trial, there was a report on the trial, and I came to a part where Gina, the 19-year-old girl, was on the witness stand, and the lawyer said, "What did you and Bev do when you parked at the river?" And she said, "We talked." "And what else did you do?" "We cried." I just felt my heart explode. I thought, my God, this wasn't a joke. This was, the scene of those two women sobbing on the river bluff broke my heart. I was just heartbroken. But I didn't know what to do with it. So I brought the paper back to Brookings and I put it in the file. Didn't think I'd do anything with it, but I couldn't throw it away. I could not throw that piece of paper away. And then I saw an ad or a call for submission to a true crime magazine, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to write about that. I'm going to write a 10-page essay about that murder. And I got rejected with a note that said, "This isn't an essay, it's a book." And I thought, yeah, right, I'm not doing that again. My only reason in writing another book. But it wouldn't let me go. The story would not let me go. So I went down to the the Rural County Courthouse and asked for the transcripts of the trial, and the woman said, I doubt we have anything from 1962, but she came back with a flash drive. And the trial transcript was on there, the appeal transcript was on there, and the letters the women wrote one another were on there. And those letters were heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And I just had to write this book. I don't know if you probably have read Elizabeth Gilbert, a number of you, but she talks about big magic. And she said there's big magic to writing. There are all these ideas floating around out there, waiting for the right person to take them and do something with them. And someone said to me, "That's your big magic. You were the person. You were the one this story was meant to be told by." And I thought, okay, I have a responsibility. Big magic followed me. I better tell this story. I did a lot of reading. I read the transcripts. I interviewed people. My sister's here. She remembers it, of course. I tried to talk to them about it, but none of them, we all remembered different things about the murder and particularly about Bev. She stood out because she was so odd in 1962, but we didn't know her. None of us, well, my brothers were actually very afraid of her, but they're wusses. So, really. Right, Jeannie? Yeah, thank you. I mean, they thought she was terrifying, and they were more afraid of her brothers, who were kind of scary. But, I mean, Bev had an IQ of 80. She dropped out in 8th grade. She came out of it, alcoholism, mental illness. They lived in poverty down by the river. She had absolutely nothing going for her. And one of the things that I started thinking about as I read more about it is, this is a woman, here are two girls that grew up in the same place, right? We grew up in the same place. How different our experience was. I didn't do anything to earn what I've had. She didn't do anything to not earn what she should have had, right? It was accident of birth. That's all it was. I won the ovarian lottery, period. And I thought about that, and I said, when I write this book, one of the things I want to talk about is that I want to not just talk about how we were different, because that's very obvious, how we were different. But how were we alike? What did we share? And as different as our lives were, as I read through the transcript and read her letters, I could find she had dreams just like I did, right? She wanted to be loved just like I did. She wanted money. I made the same, was 90 cents per hour, by the way, working at the A&W that she made working at the laundry. And she had to pay room and board to her parents because they were so poor. I thought, that's not fair. It was just luck. I got to go to college. She, of course, couldn't. She didn't have anything going for her. But I said somewhere in the book, we had this, shared the same dreams, but not the same possibilities. And that's one of the things I really worked on, is I tried to put myself into Bev's place as much as I could. I will say that writing this book, I had a lot of, I'm supposed to be funny, and I'm sorry, man. I had a lot of struggles. First of all, do I have the right to tell this story? It's not mine. And that's why I chose to write a memoir, so that I made myself a part of the story, and so that I would be vulnerable in the way that the people I'm writing about were. I struggled with pronoun choice. Because in 2000, when I started writing this, 15 maybe? 7 years, oh yeah, probably. I was aware of transgender men wishing to have the pronoun he used, and transgender women would want she. In 1962, that just wasn't even a possibility. Someone I talked to said, well, why do you use the name Bev? I said, that was her name. She never changed her name. And she had no idea that she could. She had no idea that she should be a he. So I tried to go back and forth between the two, and I just muddled it. So I just thought, I'm just going to use the pronoun of 1962. I used she. And I know a young transgender woman, we talked on the phone a lot. She lives in Houston. And I asked her about that, and she said, just do it. If you're writing an empathetic story, you don't have to apologize. So that's what I tried to do. These two, I was telling people at dinner tonight, my only creative writing class was in 1966. It was a while ago. And sitting in with Amber, who has an MFA in creative writing, and Christine, who has a doctorate in creative writing, I felt like I was in a graduate class every time we met. I thought, I am learning so much. I'm the old woman. I should be teaching them a thing or two. But I didn't. They taught me so much, and I'm very grateful to them for that. I'd be happy to answer questions about this, or when Amber's done, read a section if you want, but I was just kind of more interested in letting you know a little bit about this book and my motive for writing it, and my hope that anyone that reads it. I will say, I'm not done, sorry. I did get blowback from a couple people. And I was a little surprised that the young Native man who was murdered, I heard mostly from them, mostly from his family, and they were very angry with me. And I got it, right? I understood it. Of course you're angry with me. Even if you read the book, you'll probably stay angry. And I tried to say, I certainly didn't make him a bad person in any way, but I brought up painful memories. And I really feel bad about that. But I also thought, when I started writing this book, I thought, boy, this is old news. This is history. I'm just writing a history. Well, guess what? I'm not, right? We're back there. We're back where people in the LBTG community are suffering again. I don't know how this happened. And so I'm sorry to say that it's contemporary, and I wish it weren't. And so in that sense, I feel good about writing the book, because if it makes an old woman like me really crawl inside the life of a transgender man, something I'll never be, or never be lesbian, I'll never understand what that feels like, but I can get inside that life enough to say, love them. Just be kind. That's all you have to be. Okay? Is that all right?
Yeah. Okay, I don't know, is this,
I don't know if it's, you can talk loud, you're a teacher.
yeah, that's true.
Use your teacher voice.
So you talked about the magic, is that what you meant?
Big magic.
Big magic. And I had a writing teacher who had a little bit different way of explaining something similar, but he said, especially with the first book, it feels like there's a story you have to tell sometimes. And until you get that story off your chest, you can't write about anything else. And that's kind of how I felt with this book. So my book, The Smoke of You, A Memoir of Love During and After Deployment, tells the story of my experience as the spouse of a soldier deployed to Iraq. It tells the experience of our family during and after that time, and how my husband's military service obviously affected him deeply in unique ways. It also affected us in ways that I probably worried about initially, and then later ways that I had never imagined it might, right? And that continues today. You know, it's not something that goes away. And so as we were going through some of the things that are outlined in this book, the experience of the deployment itself, some of the challenges of reintegration. My husband experienced a physical disability, invisible one, and came home, had some of the issues with the VA medical system that led to addiction to prescription pain medicine. So there are layers and layers of experience that were unfolding as I was writing this book. But one thing that stood out to me, and the reason this became a story I had to tell, was because I realized how from the outside, our story is a pretty simple one and a happy one. It's easy for people to look at our family and say, Blake was deployed to Iraq, and he came home, and he has a family, and everything's good, right? And it's true. I mean, we're very fortunate, we're very blessed, but there have been layers, like I said, of experience and things that we've worked through under the surface that I think is really important to tell the story of, so that others might understand that a little bit, understand each other, have grace with ourselves. And so I come from a family of storytellers, and so storytelling, I think, comes a little bit naturally. You know, we like to joke, we like to, repeat the family stories over and over. But along with that story of needing to tell a story, I think we're also really good at shying away from the really difficult stories sometimes, and maybe the ones that we most need to tell. And so I'm going to read a couple segments if I have time. But the first comes from during Blake's deployment. So this comes earlier in the book. And this was probably one of the first, as my husband was deployed, one of the first things I dealt with was fear, right? And like I said, that developed into other concerns. But this is early in the experience and kind of the surfacing of some of those initial experiences that made me think I needed to work through this and understand this through writing. Less than 2 months into Blake's deployment, I was shopping when my phone trilled inside my purse. I dug it out and smiled as it flashed 0, unknown. I flipped my hair back, lifted the phone to my ear, and leaned into my shopping cart, picturing Blake in digital camo, leaning into a payphone, anticipating the deep scratch of his voice. I answered with an intimate, lilted, "Hi." He must have responded because I moved on to the usual, "How are you?" But he hesitated, exhaling into the phone, and I drew the heavy pause into my lungs. Then I panicked as my voice echoed back to me. Finally, Blake spoke. His words weighted. "I'm okay," he said. "But something's happened. Some guys were hurt." Unable to absorb the impact of his words, to make sense of the questions swarming in my mind, I focused on insignificant details: steel beams glaring with fluorescent lights, a blue honeycomb cart. I searched for something to say, something appropriate to feel. "I'm so sorry, Blake, are you..." But I couldn't finish the question. Of course he wasn't. He answered anyway. "I wasn't there on that mission. I'm okay. But it was bad." I stood between a bright waterfall of women's clothes and shelves lined with towels of blue, green, burgundy, and gold, folded neatly, stacked in 4s. I didn't speak. Blake broke the silence. "I just wanted to call before you heard it somewhere else. I wanted you to know I was okay." "Of course," I bumbled. "Blake, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say." "I know. There really isn't anything to say." George must have been snuggled in his car seat right there in front of me as I searched for something to say to the father he hadn't yet met. But I can't picture him there. I must have said something, but I can't remember what. I only remember my hollow throat, a feeling of emptiness, filled suddenly with the thought of my Grandpa Dayton. How Grandma always said he worried about becoming a father after having experienced war. I wondered, would Blake feel the same way? How couldn't he? I lingered on this question, avoiding the scream of a larger fear. What if Blake never got to be a father? My eyes followed dingy floor tiles, hoping they would lead me somewhere, backwards in time maybe, to a wedding dance, where I could lean into Blake's warmth, listen to his off-key rendition of Desperado, or maybe forward to an airport embrace, to a moment when I could feel Blake's arms locked behind my back, his breath on my neck. Instead, my eyes crossed, blurring the grid of tile into a fuzzy, floating checkerboard. Eventually, Blake said, "Well, I need to get off the phone. Other guys need to call home." I'm sure we said goodbye, but all I remember is numbness. I breathed and then blinked as I lifted my eyes. My features felt bloated and heavy, like they do after a deep sleep sometimes. My nose blurred my vision. Lips felt fat and numb. I moved mechanically, lifting, reaching, lowering, abandoning a package of onesies I had planned to buy. And then I started to walk, letting the worn wheels of the cart pull me through aisles. I made it home somehow, and I lifted George from his car seat and paced the living room with him snuggled in my arms. What if that's our last call? "I'm sorry," was all I could say. The question echoed like a voice from the hall, a memory of someone else's life. It was my Grandma Evie, her story of Grandpa Dayton's tragic death. Dayton had been working at home, announced a quick trip to town, just a few errands, home soon. She waved a quick goodbye. But when Dayton neared the train tracks a half-mile south of their farm where cows had gotten out the day before, Grandma was sure. He squinted into the sun to check the fence line. When the train emerged from the grove of trees along the track, he was 30 feet away. He hit the brakes. Too late. Later, Grandma wondered, why didn't I go to him? Why didn't I kiss him goodbye? I'd always heard those questions as a wish for one last connection, one last "I love you." But after Blake's call, after feeling the threat of tragedy pulse through my body, I understood she wanted more than a goodbye. If Grandpa had stopped Dayton with a kiss, slowed him just a bit, the train would have passed. Tragedy might have been avoided. She wanted to be the something that kept him alive. So as I sat in my apartment staring at a photo of Blake, playing my own track of regret, what if this is the last conversation, the one I spend the rest of my life reliving? I willed myself to be the something that kept Blake alive, but I knew it wasn't in my power. And even though my willing, my wishing was something like a prayer, I couldn't pray for God to save Blake. I'd never believed in praying for specific outcomes. Not because I'd witnessed enough good people suffering terrible things to accept that life simply wasn't fair. I hadn't lived long enough to learn that yet, but because it felt selfish. 2 soldiers from Blake's unit were already dead. 2 more hospitalized and fighting for their lives. I couldn't demand or even hope that my desires be prioritized. Prayer wasn't an act of control, but an act of submission. I gave myself over to it. I tried to imagine those men I didn't know. I pictured Blake and other members of the 147th Field Artillery, American and Iraqi soldiers, their families and their friends, and I prayed for something I couldn't name. Not peace, because that seemed unattainable. Not strength, because they needed more than that, and less than that. I prayed for something like the ability to just get by, to find a way through, to keep moving forward, progressing toward a future where things would get better someday. Grandma Evie wrote that, about the days following Dayton's death, how she chose a walnut casket over ornate metal because she knew Dayton loved trees. How when she returned to see him at rest in that casket, he looked peaceful. And how she said goodbye then, knowing that somehow his death had been inevitable, that he'd had to leave, but that she would survive. So that is what I prayed for, wordlessly, my prayer morphing into a meditation, a visualization of these families carrying out their lives, carrying on, a channeling of the hum of fear into a positive force, an energy coming from somewhere inside that might feel like numbness, but might recreate an energy to move them forward. I refocused my vision, studying the image of Blake and I from our wedding day, hanging on the wall just above my desk. In the photo, my head tilts slightly, resting against his lapel. We both squint with serene smiles into sunlight. Behind us, pillowy white clouds dot a cornflower blue sky. Feeling connected somehow, I talked to Blake, tentatively at first, about how much I missed him and how scared I was that I wouldn't see him again. I apologized until fear and regret gave way to the warmth of a story, a litany of memories, summer nights in the dugout sipping Old Mill Light, a shy marriage proposal, a friend bellied up to the shrimp cocktail bar at our wedding reception, until I arrived back at that moment, the uncertainty we faced. In the near darkness and complete silence of my living room, I reassured my husband. Blake, if you don't make it home, it will be enough. Knowing that we were in love, that we were meant to be together, even if just for a little while, that George was meant to be. I grazed my fingertips over my collarbone. Don't feel bad if you don't make it. Some people never feel as loved in their whole lives as I have felt loved by you. So, I guess one reason I wanted to share that piece of the story is because, we've heard the word vulnerability a couple times already, but I think that's, Mary talked about being vulnerable and sharing as much of herself as she was sharing of other stories. And I think that even though, like I said, we're not very good at telling the difficult stories, my grandma Evie found ways to slip that in, and she shared that with us, and she gave us that gift of vulnerability and being willing to ask questions. And those were difficult questions for her to ask. She, remarried and had a family. But the fact that she asked those questions and shared that with us was something that helped me to make sense of things as I was going through that experience, right? To make a connection to someone who had lost and, knowing that they had made it, right? And found their way through that. And so that's really what I hope that this book can do for others who read it, even for my kids, right? Like, even that story right there, I don't know when if or when we would tell that story to our kids, right? But I think it's helpful for them to know that, and hopefully then to be able to ask their own questions. So I think that's why we write, right? It's big magic, it's a story we need to tell, but hopefully it's something we can share with others to make sense of it ourselves, but then hopefully if we do that in the writing process, share that with our readers too. So, thank you.
You know, as far as being vulnerable, oh, I don't need this out loud. I talked to, gave a talk in Brookings, and a lot of people I knew were in there. Because, you know, we lived in Brookings for 50 years, and one woman raised her hand and said, I found out more about you tonight than I wanted to know about myself. And I said, well, tough, you know? You have to tell these things, right? You just have to. And by the way, we had a lot of laughs too, didn't we? We shed a few tears, but we had a lot of fun at our
I heard you tell Mary that she needed to be funny, and I was like, I've done that approach before, because there really are funny parts in this
Yes,
book.
there are.
I was glad when a friend of mine said, I laughed and cried my way through, and I was like, I'm glad you laughed too, because that is how we deal with difficult things too, right? Is through laughter. But you know, when the overall arc of the story is, you know, a challenging one, we kind of have to
deal with the challenging issues.
So
right?
sorry,
We just
our
do it.
apologies.
Yeah.
Did anybody have any questions? Wanted to ask?
Molly, do you have a question?
No. You're making sure he's not choking.
Matt,
I have a question. So you mentioned.
do you eat as much? I want to know if you can still eat as much as you did when you were in college. He would come to my house and I cooked for days. Really? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Matt.
So I have a serious question and a not so serious question.
Okay.
So serious question. You mentioned big magic. Do you feel like the story is done with you?
Good question.
This particular story,
Yeah.
Do you feel like the story is
What was the
done with
question?
he
Yeah.
wants to know if I feel like the story is done, this story, if I'm done with this story.
you? That level of intelligence is St. Cloud State right there.
I think so, Matt, but I think so. But maybe not. How's that for an answer? I'm trying to think who else I would write more about. I'm not done writing about myself, family beware. But anyway, go ahead. Another one?
Well, the second question was, when will you write the story about kicking these college kids out of your home into a blizzard? But
I did. I got sick of them. There was a blizzard, and I said, if you go now, you'll get back to St. Cloud. And away they went. I couldn't deal with you
I
anymore.
know. And here we are.
He made it. It was a learning lesson.
Do you want to talk about and maybe you don't, the one of the three that is still alive in your interaction?
Yeah, the teenage girl is still alive. I've talked to her on the phone a few times. The first time I called to tell her what I was doing, she was, I could tell, very shocked. And she said, well, keep me informed. And so then I called her another time, and we spent a lot of time. She didn't really want to talk about this that much, but we spent a lot of time talking about growing up. She grew up in a little town even smaller than Chamberlain, just about 9 miles east of us. And we just talked about how naive we both were and how little we understood about anything, sexuality, human nature, complications. We both just felt we just didn't deal with life, or didn't have to deal with things that it seemed like our children and grandchildren were having to deal with today. And I told her that I would send her a copy if she wanted to, and she said, no, that's fine. I don't think I need to read it. And I don't know if she has. She does. She lives out of state. She's married, has been married for over 50 years, is a grandmother and a grandmother. I think she's had a good life. She sounded incredibly sweet on the phone. I think, I just think she was so confused about a lot of things. I mean, she said in the trial that she wasn't sure that she really believed Bev was a man. and I won't get into that because I have a 12-year-old granddaughter in the room, but there's a little bit of that they had to talk about it. If you read the trial transcripts, the questions they asked this 19-year-old girl about her intimacy with this woman, I thought, why do they? I mean, her parents are sitting out there, the most intimate questions, and I thought, how does she stand it? How did this girl get through this? And the same thing with Bev, the trans man who was just totally out of it in terms of just couldn't quite make sense of what this all meant, and was sad, knew that he'd done a bad thing, and I don't know.
And
But yeah.
they were all together when it happened, right? They witnessed the murder?
Yeah, she was in the car with Myron,
Yeah.
and Bev rammed him into the curb and got out. Well, first of all, yeah, got out. And anyway, to make a long story short, walked over and I said something to Myron, and Myron said, you can't be with her or something. And Myron said, well, I'm engaged to her. And Bev put a 22 to his chest and pulled the trigger. So, and there were witnesses. I mean, there was no question. There was no question that she committed this murder. That was never in doubt. But her attorney the more time he spent, the more he felt she should not be in prison. That for so many reasons, she was not a candidate for prison. Because, well, like I said, her IQ was 72 the night of the murder, or a week after the murder, I guess. Yeah. So, it's just tragic.
Can you outline what became of her, just gradually? I mean, over years, she was in psychiatric facility.
Bev was sent to the York, she was found guilty of second-degree manslaughter, sent to the York Women's Prison in York, Nebraska, and was there for 2 years, and her attorney, Sam Maston, he saw some loopholes or some problems in the judge's instructions to the jury, and so he put together another case, appealed it. They had a second trial, and she won the appeal, and then she spent 20-some years in the state hospital in Yankton, South Dakota. She got out, but often checked herself back in. She trained as a barber in the state hospital, and she'd go out, but I mean, really, that was home in a lot of ways, right? That was her home. But the last several years, she lived in a little house on the river bluffs, that river, and had good neighbors. And I went on to the website for her obituary, and one of the neighbors said she was a great neighbor. She brought her, she'd catch fish and she'd bring fish and share with us. I think her last years might have been happy. I hope. I mean, I wanted to put this murder in a context, not to make her, what she did was horrendous. There was no other word for it. She did a horrendous thing. But within the context of her life, I wanted to say, you don't have to excuse her, but understand her. You don't have to excuse her. Or, what she did was unforgivable in many ways. But please understand what drove this person to do this thing. Yes, Amber.
How many years did your husband deal with the addiction?
How long is it?
So when he returned from Iraq, he was diagnosed with a degenerative disc disease. And so it's kind of hard to say exactly when the addiction began, I guess, because the VA's response was medicine, right? And he tried some therapies and things for years. And to be honest, I talk about, when I mentioned having grace with ourselves, I talk in the book about the shame I felt when I realized the medicine he was on, and I hadn't really questioned or paid attention until he had surgery, and the nurse said, seriously, he takes all this? And she said, please take this home and get rid of it, So it's difficult to say, it was 7 years that he suffered with chronic pain. And so that's another thing that, just reflecting on that experience of understanding what it is to love someone who's dealing with chronic pain. I didn't understand it until, honestly, I didn't understand it until he had had surgery and I saw him smile. And I went, how long has it been since I saw that smile, right? You know, so that chronic pain and that addiction to pain medicine, you know, I mean, it's, unfortunately, it happens in increments, right? And that's why I think it sneaks up on us. I don't understand how, but when my husband realized that he had been addicted to pain medicine, he was able to taper off, and he has not suffered with, you know, well, he'll admit he has felt an urge, you know, but he's a very strong-willed person that somehow, but we also have a great support network, and, you know, he's found ways to work through that. But it's such an important issue, and another way of relating to, you know, to this story, just the challenges that we face, that we face in life. So I have a hard time saying exactly how long, but like I said, I think that's part of the nature of the problem, right? Is that it happens in increments, so it's hard to recognize when it's shifted from, right, proper use or to an addiction or a problem. But definitely something that affects a lot of veterans, but also a lot of people in our country.
Yeah, you don't have to be a soldier's wife to understand this story.
What has been your husband's response to your story?
So I was thinking when you're, you know, the questioner talking about, you know, talking about other people's stories and sharing other people's stories. My husband is one of the most introverted people you would ever meet. So ironically, he married a writer, but he knew he married a writer, and he says that. So, but I did. So the first story that I wrote, that Christine was my teacher, and I wrote the very first story that is now in this book. When she said to me, "I think it's time to publish this. This is ready. This is a good story," and I went, "Yes, right. I'm a college student, and my teacher thinks I've done good work." And then I went, "Oh no." Blake has no idea that I'm writing this. He didn't even, again, going back to the not sharing of stories, he didn't even know really what I was grappling with or trying to make sense of, right? We didn't have those conversations. And so I had to print out this essay, and I went home and handed it to Blake and said, "I need you to read this." And then I went to Walmart for like 2 or 3 hours. And then I came home, and he said right away, he said, "That's a great story." He said, "That's your story. It's the story of what it felt to be you in that moment." And he said, "I'm in the story, but it's really not about me. It's not my story." And, you know, so he was very supportive all the way through. When I got to writing about addiction to pain medicine and, you know, and the depression that comes along with that, I asked him again, "Are you sure? You're sure that you're okay with me telling the story?" And at that point, his answer had shifted to more of a hell yeah, because I wish I had read the story. You know, not just a, yeah, go ahead. And it was, no, you need to. And I, you know, so he encouraged me in a different way at that point. Ironically, he hasn't read, you know, so when you mentioned Gina saying, "No thanks, I don't need to read that," you know, right now that's how my husband feels, and I get that. I think, like I said, even that initial story, how would it feel, right, to read someone else's reading of your thoughts and your experience and their ways of making sense of it? And so, you know, he says he will someday, and I think he probably will. But I also understand that that would be difficult. Like, so there are things that maybe you don't want to revisit at a certain time. But, you know, I think his approach is, I'm not the one that's going to tell the story, but I want people to know. And so I really appreciate him supporting that and being willing to be vulnerable along with me, because that was not his choice.
Would each of you be willing to share a little bit about your discipline of writing and how you accomplished what you've done to write a book?
Compared to the 2 young women, I had no discipline because I wasn't working. So, I mean, I really did have discipline, but that's all I had to do. So, on both books, I'm not disciplined right now, but on both books, I would get up, have coffee, go into the office, take my phone in there, and I would not answer the phone unless it was Ken or more. I mean, I'd leave a message, because I'm not talking to you until about 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And I would just write and write and write. Now, I am a terrible first draft person. I'm even worse on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 18th draft. So I spend a lot of time revising, because I'm just such a sloppy first draft writer. So a lot of that was revision that I did over and over and over again. They, however, had small children, a full-time job, and they were writing. So talk about yours.
Well, I can be very honest that my discipline came from having Mary and Christine waiting for me
Well, there you go.
every couple weeks at Cottonwood Coffee saying, okay, what did you write? And that's very I think the accountability of having writing friends and partners and mentors is the only way that this book would exist. So, yeah.
And we wrote in short blocks. When I'm writing, I never think about the finished product early on. I write in blocks. I have a scene I want to write, or something I want to write about. And so we would turn in, no more than 10 pages a session.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps too. We weren't trying to bring in big chapters or anything.
Are you continuing your dialogue?
We're trying to, Zooming. We're trying to. Got a little hairy when she moved to Canada, I don't know, she had a lot going on and you had a lot, but I think we'll do it again. I hope so.
I feel like we're all kind of feeling the knocking of new projects that kind of, we have ideas that now it's like, okay, I'm gonna need you to help me. So,
Yeah, I did send
I think the call is coming,
Yeah.
it's time.
I did just send them an essay
Yeah.
that we're gonna work on, called My Father and I Travel Cather Country. About going to Red Cloud, Nebraska, my father was moving in here. Anyway. Well, where's Rachel? Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Appreciate this. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Okay.